Oh, hello. Okay, who here pirates films? I just want a show of hands. Okay. Wow, okay, well, I think the few of you who did not put your hands up, or many of the few of you who did not put your hands up, perhaps not admitting it, though most of you obviously are, so there we are. Today, I want to ask two questions. The first question is, why do so many people do it? And the second question is it okay to do it? These two questions are obviously somehow related. The fact that so many people do it, if you're aged 15 to 25, you're in the majority if you do it, obviously means that, in a certain sense, it can't quite be as wrong as we might be made to believe. But at the same time, if you feel blasé about pirating, like it's no big deal, or alternatively, if you feel like it's wrong, but do it anyway, maybe you need to think a little bit more about it. So what I want to do today, very briefly, is not to advocate it, not to criticize it, but just to encourage you to reflect more about it. Okay, before I answer the various questions I've just asked, quick disclaimer. I want to say that I understand those few of you who did not put your hands up. And in fact, just to be clear to any intellectual property lawyers, film producers, talent managers, law enforcement agents, representatives of media corporations who may be listening, I don't pirate films either. Today, I'm just going to play a role. I'm going to imagine I pirate films. I will be your mirror. When I say I will mean you. I will mean people I know, friends, family, colleagues, students, most of the people I talk to from day to day. Okay, now that's clear. Let me return to the question. Why do I pirate films? So my main reason is access. I teach film, I write about film, I make films. The films I make are usually on the subject of film. Films are very, very important to me. I like to see as many as I can. I spend hours every month tracking new releases of the best films around the world. But I have little chance of ever seeing most of these, legally, in fact. For example, Xavier Dolan is a celebrity in France. He's 28 years old. He's made 6 films in 7 years. He's won multiple César. In Britain, it's like he doesn't exist. If I want to see his films, what choice do I have? I torrent. By extension, an important part of teaching art, which is what I do, involves exposing students to the new, the unexpected, the challenging, the unknown, to expand their horizons. If this horizon extends only as far as a national border, I'm not doing my job. Unfortunately, the only non-English language films that tend to get released in this country are romantic comedies and horror films. So to get other films, I have to cross national borders. If I can do so legally, I will. If I can't, I'll do it illegally. Now, usually open culture advocates, like the Pirate Party, cite access as their key defense for piracy. But, says the film industry, most of the time it's not about access. People pirate because either they don't want to wait to see something or pay to see it. At which point, the film industry wags its collective finger and says, no, that's wrong. You're committing a crime. Well, okay, in most countries, torrenting is a crime. But instead of just assuming that everyone who does it is doing something bad, let's think a little bit about why people pirate more deeply. So, one key reason why people pirate is that the media industry itself drives them to do it. Now, this seems a little counterintuitive, so I'm going to try and explain it. Many studies have shown that those who pirate films also tend to spend more on films than those who don't pirate films. They go to cinemas, buy Blu-rays, use VOD sites, stuff like that. So in a way, the question is not why do we pirate, but why do we pirate certain things and not other things? And the answer typically comes down to how easy or difficult it is to get hold of particular content. People pirate in the absence of attractive alternatives. The active media consumer will always seek out content. In a way, it's up to the media industry whether they do so illegally or legally. Let me give you an example. In the early 2000s, with the rise of Napster and LimeWire, everyone started pirating music. The music industry had no idea how to respond. It hemorrhaged billions of dollars a year. The whole industry, in effect, just melted down. Out of the ashes of this, a few years later, came iTunes and Spotify. platforms on which you could listen to anything you liked for a reasonable monthly fee. Suddenly, the access problem was solved. Within a few years, piracy had nosedived. Now, there are many statistics out there, many contradictory and none entirely reliable. Most, however, show a significant decline in music piracy in the years following the release of Spotify, typically somewhere between 30% and 80%. So, a happy ending of sorts. But there was one big loser in all this, and that was the music industry itself. This change was also a huge change in power, in the balance of power between music producers and tech companies like Apple and Spotify. They took on most of the power, they kept most of the profit. In film, however, this transfer of power never happened. It's still Hollywood and the big American broadcasters who call the shots and make most of the money. And they don't want things to change. So they keep very tight control over their content. For example, by making sure that Netflix only gets crumbs. In this context, it's not so hard to see why pirating is common. I log on to Netflix, I see that it doesn't have any decent films, so I torrent. Or to take a TV example, everyone's been talking about the latest season of Homeland for months. I feel like I'm being left out of a conversation. I want to see it, but I don't have a TV, I don't have a subscription bundle to Sky, I don't have a TV license. To get all of these over the course of a year, I'd have to spend £600, £700, £800. I want to see Homeland, but not that much. So what do? If I lived in the United States, I could get onto a subscription channel for $10 a month. I could binge on Homeland on my laptop and then unsubscribe. In Britain, I can't. So what do? I torrent. So that's why I'm saying torrenting is a rational consumer choice. And what makes it rational? It's the film and TV industry itself and the way it chooses to distribute its content. Now, of course, just because torrenting is a rational choice doesn't make it right. For example, I don't defend greedy, unthinking, compulsive downloading, where people just constantly download all the time, content they probably won't even watch, and they do it just because they can. The desire to own as much media as possible is just a mirror image of the way media companies themselves treat culture as if it were property. But even if you do pirate for quote-unquote selfish reasons, I believe it's still possible to do so ethically. And so at this point, I want to introduce to the world a new concept, the concept of ethical piracy. Ethical behavior involves thinking through the consequences of your actions on people you don't know. It involves reflecting on this on a case-by-case basis. Every time you consider buying a t-shirt or driving a diesel car, think about the consequences. Might it encourage child labor if I go to H&M? Might it contribute to lung disease? It's the same with torrenting. Every time you're about to start downloading, think about the consequences of doing so. Ethics is about the small choices we make every day, every hour, even every minute. Whether or not we live ethically is the sum total of these choices. For example, here are 3 choices I recently made. The imaginary me recently made. The short films of Jean Eustache. Jean Eustache is a marginal early 1970s French independent filmmaker. He died very young. His short films are not commercially available anywhere in the world. I've spent the last 3 or 4 years trying to track them, and finally, a few weeks ago, I found a torrent site which had them. What did I do? Well, what were the consequences of me torrenting? Eustache is dead. I really couldn't think of any. There was no money, nobody was losing money out of it because there was no commercial release of this material. Eustache is dead, so he wouldn't care. Even if he were alive, he was a passionate cinephile, and so I think he would appreciate the time and the effort I took to find his films and subsequently share them with the world. In short, did I torrent? Yes. The Color Wheel. This is a 2010 film made by an American independent filmmaker called Alex Ross Perry, made for $7,000, ultra low budget. I needed it for a class on DIY filmmaking. If I'd gotten my stuff together a few months in advance, I could have gotten my university to buy it, but I was a bit of a slack about it, and so I left it to the night before, and I needed the film. I looked online, I found it on the torrenting site. I also found it on Vimeo on demand. I could download it in perpetuity for about $10. Alex Ross Perry works on the fringes of Hollywood. He doesn't make a huge amount of money. He had a momentary break with HBO a couple of years ago before they fired him. His films are usually about $100,000 or so budget, which is relatively tiny. I also know that about $8.50 out of that $10 that I would have spent on Vimeo would go directly to the filmmaker or his production company. Vimeo would take about a 15% cut. In this context, did I torrent or did I buy? I bought. Okay, third example, bit trickier, Homeland. I've already talked about this. More ambiguous. So I already mentioned a rational motivation for downloading. Here's a snapshot of my kind of ethical thought process as I was thinking whether or not to do it. I know national media industries lose hundreds of millions of pounds a year through piracy, but I also know that the costs to the industry of pirating are directly proportionate to their profits. The things that are most pirated are things that make the most money, even once the pirating loss is factored in. Seen this way, pirating could be seen as a kind of an informal corporation tax. It's redistributive. I like the idea of redistribution. For me, faced with a limited spending budget on films, I want to be able to choose where my relatively small amount of expenditure goes. I want to choose where the money ends up. I want to be a part of this redistribution from big budget to small budget, from mainstream to independent. So in this case, did I torrent? I did, okay? That's a very brief summary of my particular ethical reasoning in 3 particular circumstances. Yours might have been different. Next time, mine might be different. Each time I'm about to press the button, I think again. But my point is simply this. Piracy is a multitude of different activities carried out by different people for different reasons. It's too diverse just to be dismissed as inherently wrong. But it is ethically ambiguous. There's no denying that. When or if you do it, you have to think it through. So to be clear, I'm not saying torrent, I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying every time you do it, and most of you do, obviously, then try to be an ethical pirate. Every time you're about to press the button, take a few moments to think through the implications. Ask questions like, would I have paid money for this? If so, what are the consequences of not doing so now? Will people suffer? Will people benefit? It's possible. Is choosing to pirate this film here and now an ethically reasonable decision to make? It's not up to media companies to answer these questions. It's certainly not up to me to answer these questions. It's up to you. Thank you.